Mank, the fictionalized account of a real man's writing of a fictionalized account of a real man's life. It's Mankception. Hey everybody, welcome to Mainely Movies. Today I'm going to be talking about Netflix's 2020 biographical drama, Mank, which will be released on December 4th. If you're new here, please consider subscribing for a variety of movie-related content like reviews, rank lists, and trailer reactions. All my reviews include a breakdown of the pros and cons, my rating, and some tailored film recommendations, so be sure to watch through to the end of this video for all of that extra content. Mank stars Gary Oldman, Amanda Seyfried, and Lily Collins, and was directed by David Fincher. It tells the story of screenwriter Herman J. Mankiewicz, played by Gary Oldman, as he rushes to write the screenplay for Orson Welles' Citizen Kane. I've been looking forward to Mank basically since it was announced, and even though it was quite the process to get the screener for this one, I did finally get a chance to see it a bit early. Now, I'm a really big fan of David Fincher's films, and I love movies about making movies, so Mank seemed pretty tailor-made for me, and I enjoyed it. However, it is tailor-made. This is not a one-size-fits-all kind of movie. It's easily Fincher's most niche film, and I don't see this having broad mainstream appeal with general audiences. This is a movie meant for film lovers, and I don't just mean people who like to watch movies. I mean people who are interested and invested in film as a whole, in the history of the studio era of Hollywood and the films that came out during that time period, in the process of screenwriting and filmmaking and everything that goes into creating a movie. And the movie that's at the center of Mank is, of course, Citizen Kane. But despite being a movie about making a movie, Mank's pretty different from its conspecifics. While we do see some behind-the-scenes filmmaking moments, it's not a movie about the filming of Citizen Kane. So if you're looking for a movie like 8½, or Day for Night, this isn't that type of film. Instead, it's much more focused on the screenwriting process and the pre-production that went into Citizen Kane. But even that is really just used as a framing device to set up for the semi-biopic of Herman J. Mankiewicz. It's certainly a fictionalized account of events, but it was incredibly clever in design. Not only is it about the making of Citizen Kane, but it's also about the background and inspirations for that film. That would be cool in itself, but Mank goes a step further, drawing continuous parallels between both Citizen Kane and the making of Citizen Kane, but also between Citizen Kane and this very film, Mank. And that is easily my favorite thing about this movie. I love how this functions as a companion film to Citizen Kane. I mean, you could watch this and probably understand the story without having seen Citizen Kane, but you lose so much of this movie's whole without it. So do yourself a favor and make sure you've seen Citizen Kane, preferably recently, before watching this one. The story connections between the two are fairly obvious, but it's definitely cool seeing the fictionalized real-life counterparts of the main characters and events of Citizen Kane. But the coolest part for me was the stylistic connection. Mank perfectly emulates Citizen Kane without feeling like a forced fan service copycat of it. Instead, it's entirely an homage to Citizen Kane, and more broadly, that era of Hollywood. Everything from the technical aspects, to the film structure, to the dialogue feel like Citizen Kane. And those stylistic parallels are just so satisfying to me. Citizen Kane's a movie that's told in a very non-linear fashion. It jumps around in time a lot, and can be a bit confusing to follow if you're not really paying attention. That aspect, and perhaps criticism of Citizen Kane, is brought up as part of the story of Mank, but it's also replicated in its structure. Rather than jumping around through moments of Charles Foster Kane's life, we jump through moments of Mankiewicz's life. There are a lot of flashbacks, but much like in Citizen Kane, we have a then present-day scenario we keep coming back to. Rather than a reporter investigating Kane's last words, here we see Mank writing Citizen Kane. But in both films, those flashbacks serve to provide the necessary background information we need to fully understand the film's present-day storyline. And it's not just the story and structure of Citizen Kane that Mank draws upon. There are certain scenes and shots that are practically ripped right from Citizen Kane. For instance, one moment involving Mankiewicz visually parallels perhaps the most iconic shot of the opening Rosebud sequence of Citizen Kane. Homages and references like that are very cool to see in movies, but they're elevated to the extreme in Mank because of the technical aspects. You could very easily mistake this film for one that was actually made in the early 1940s. It's just so meticulously and impeccably crafted to emulate that time period. And we're not just talking the costumes and dialogue and set design here. I mean everything about the film itself. The cinematography here is outstanding, and is sure to nab this film some nominations at the very least. There's something inherently cinematic about black and white photography, thanks to the contrast and lighting, but the impressiveness of the cinematography goes far beyond that for me. As with the story and structure, the coolest part of this movie for me is how well it emulates Citizen Kane and other films of the time period. Anybody can shoot a nicely lit film in black and white, but not many people can replicate the exact feel of a 1940s film. The framing and rack focuses, the style of camera movements and soft edges, it's all spot on. But so much attention to detail was put into this that even the byproduct process elements were replicated. Things that you'd never see in a movie today, like the real changeover cues in the upper right-hand corner, or that momentary stutter flash that happens right before a fade out or dissolve transition in old movies because of the physical process of overlaying the film. That process is very different today, so that's an extremely minute detail that had to be created and added as an effect to nearly every scene transition. It's the kind of thing that'll probably go unnoticed by most viewers, but it adds that extra tiny bit of authenticity to the film, which is just so cool to me. The technical elements aren't the only thing that are spot on for the time period of this film. The performances are equally as convincing. We've got some big name actors in this movie, but they really dissolve into these roles. So again, it's easy to forget that you're watching a movie that came out in 2020. Nothing about these performances feels modern. Even though the characters in this film are real people, everything about them has that heightened, larger-than-life feel that you get from performances in movies of the time period. You get that snappy dialogue, the slight air of grandeur, the almost overacting intensity of an actor who's recently made the jump from stage to screen. It's all there, again, contributing to the authentic, period-accurate feel. This authenticity and emulation of Citizen Kane does have its downside, though. Much like Citizen Kane, the actual story and plot of Mank is kinda dull. It plods along with fairly uneven pacing and lots of dialogue-heavy scenes that, frankly, can be pretty boring at times. It was able to hold my attention because of the parallels and connections to Citizen Kane and my interest in the filmmaking process, but it's definitely the weakest aspect of the film and probably won't be all that captivating to the average moviegoer. If you've seen my review of Citizen Kane, you know it took me quite a few rewatches to get to the point where I actually found that story to be interesting. So if all the parallels between these two films hold true, at least there's still hope for Mank's story on rewatch. In spite of all the hype and anticipation, Mank is gonna join the ranks of Alien 3 as an outlier in David Fincher's filmography. While Alien 3 was a case of studio interference, Mank is a case of studio emulation. It's almost a self-imposed interference of sorts. It's a really impressive simulation of a 1940s film, but it still is the same end result. It doesn't feel like a David Fincher movie. That's not a major detriment for me, but he has a very recognizable filmmaking style, so I think some fans of his will be disappointed when they don't see that here. It's not your typical Fincher movie because he wasn't making it for his typical audience. I'm sure a lot of people will call this a love letter to Hollywood, but it's really more of a personal passion project. The script was written by David Fincher's father, who never saw the film come to fruition before his death, so there was an element of family legacy to the production of Mank, in addition to the more obvious Hollywood legacy. Alright, let's talk about the pros and cons. Pro number one is what I'm going to call the homage aspect. Basically, this is the combination of all of the parallels between Mank and Citizen Kane. The story connections, the non-linear flashback plot structure, the cinematic techniques, the scenes and shots that are references or replications. It's just such a satisfying thing that was done with meticulous attention to detail. Because Mank not only pays homage to Citizen Kane and that filmmaking era, but it truly feels like it's of that era. The second pro has got to be the technical aspects. And this is sort of a dual pro, because I think this film is technically wonderful of its own accord, but when tied into the homage emulation aspect I mentioned in Pro 1, it reaches a whole new level of impressiveness. The black and white cinematography not only looks wonderful, but it also fits the story and style, so it's not just a random gimmick. Everything about the production was done to give the appearance of a 1940s film. The changeover cues, the transition effects and film grain, even the sound design replicates the era with its slight hiss and pop aesthetic and bold, not quite echoey dialogue tone. Pro number 3 is the performances. As with the second pro, the performances are impressive enough on their own, but when taken into the time period authentic context of the film, they shine even more. Even with recognizing the modern actors, it's really easy to forget you're watching a new film. Everybody feels like they're giving an authentic 1940s performance, and it's captivating to watch. The performances are great across the board, but Gary Oldman is certainly the standout as the titular Mank, disappearing into the role and delivering some impressive and exhausting monologues in true screenwriter fashion. On the con side, the biggest issue is how dull the plot is. The premise is really interesting, and the stylistic execution is top-notch, but the actual story is a bit underwhelming. I didn't come into it expecting action or anything, but I didn't expect the story to be as boring as it was. The premise and references kept me invested in the story, but if it didn't have those, it would have been a somewhat lackluster film for me. So I can only imagine what it'll be like for people who aren't into filmmaking and classic movies. Before I give you my rating and recommendations, I want to remind you that if you're interested in buying any of the films I mentioned today, I do have affiliate links for all of them in the description below. I get a small commission from anything you buy using one of my links, so I'd really appreciate it if you'd use them if you're in the market for any of these movies. I'm gonna give Mank 3.5 out of 5 paws. I really love the style here, and all of the fun elements for film lovers to sink their teeth into, but I'd definitely be lying if I said I wasn't a bit underwhelmed by the actual plot. I would recommend Mank to people who are really into film. People who not only love watching movies, but love diving into the history of them. People who really appreciate the technical elements of film and are genuinely interested in the process of filmmaking and screenwriting. Existing fans of Citizen Kane will have a great time picking out all the references and seeing the real-life inspirations for the story put to film, and fans of classic film will love and appreciate the painstaking, meticulous attention to detail that went into making this film look and feel like it's from the early 40s. If you liked Mank, I would obviously recommend Citizen Kane. Honestly, it might be a bit of a silly recommendation, because I'm sure most people will have watched it before watching Mank. I'd certainly recommend that people do that, but just in case you don't, watching Citizen Kane will open up a whole massive level of understanding and appreciation for the style of Mank. If you want another film about a screenwriter, you should definitely check out Trumbo. It's another fictionalized account of a screenwriter's life and writing process, this time focusing on Dalton Trumbo and Hollywood of the 50s and 60s. If you like the real-world parallels and behind-Hollywood aspects of this film, you might want to watch Sunset Boulevard. It too follows a screenwriter and offers a clever parallel between its story and the real-life career of its star, Gloria Swanson. Alright, a couple questions for you guys. Number 1, have you seen Mank? If so, what'd you think of it? And number 2, what's your favorite movie about making movies? Be sure to leave your answers in the comments below so we can get a discussion going. Alright, so if you got some enjoyment, insight, or information out of this review, I'd appreciate if you'd hit that like button. And if you haven't done so already, please hit subscribe or add it to see more videos like this. Till next time, this has been Alyssa with Mainely Movies, the way life should be.